try and do it at the beginning. Excellent. And as a note, we're doing recording, so anything that we share in this session will be visible to other people. Just good to keep in mind, if you want to ask a question today that has context to your organisation, you are welcome to share as much as feels comfortable. Just know that we will be sharing this recording as well. All right. Before I introduce my co-host today, who I'm super excited to get to jam with, I do want to just set a couple of, I guess, rules that we have in place. A really simple SRL. Safety is super important for us in our group. If you, at any point through the session, you notice any behaviour in terms of anyone entering the room, sharing anything or saying anything inappropriate, please just alert us straight away. That's really, really important for us to make sure that we're all held safe. It's also safety from a being respectful and open to share different perspectives and ideas. Some things you're going to agree with, some things you may not. But again, the goal is to spark different ideas and ensure that we're holding this as a safe space. Respect lines nicely into that as well, knowing that we all have different perspectives that we're coming from, and learning. That's what we're here to do. Share some stories, learn some things, and my hope is that you walk away from today going, huh, I never really thought of it like that. That's sort of my goal, is that we share something today that sparks a different thought in you as well. Logistics wise, we won't be doing any breakout rooms today. From a format, this is a new style we're experimenting with. This is our second time. I'm calling it a live interactive podcast, because that's all I could come up with in terms of what it is. What we do is you submit questions on Slido, and I'm going to share the link very shortly. You submit your questions, we'll vote, kind of like a lean coffee. Top questions go to the top, and we'll hold 5 minutes to answer the question. David and I will probably have turns at sort of sharing our different perspectives. And if you want to add some context, just put your name in with the question, so then we know who asked it. We'll get you to open your mic if you want to. Give us a bit of context, and then we'll jam on it for 5 minutes. Timer will go off, we'll go on to the next question. So it's like listening to people talking about an interesting topic, but if you want to join in, you can. If you just want to listen, then that's cool as well. All right, so that's the format, that's the rules. Have I ticked off all my admin parts of this? Oh, Slido, right. Let me chuck into our chat channel. So this is your opportunity. If you've come along with a question, and you would like that question answered, then feel free to head over to Slido. Let's just check that this link all works well. David and I, we chucked in a couple of kickstarting questions. So there's a couple that are in there. So either you can add your own question. And again, if you put your name with it, then we will know that that's you, so we can get some context. Or you can vote on ones that are already there as well. So we'll leave that for a minute or two. Feel free to go in, add them. Again, if you want to remain anonymous, you are welcome to, but just know we might need a bit of context sometimes if there's any intricacies around it. All right, the topic today, organisational design. And we came across this topic last month. Everybody voted, and this was the one that popped up to the top. Well, actually, the one that popped to the top was org design, roles, and career pathing, which was just massive. So we put another poll up on LinkedIn and said, of those three, which would be of the most interest, and organisational design got 66%. So that's what we're running with today. Now, there might be a couple of questions that sort of touch on the roles and the career pathing, but we're going to kind of focus in on organisational design today. And at the end of the session, we're going to do another poll to see what you want to talk about next month, and that will include those other two. So if you feel like you wanted to talk about those, you can vote for them at the end of the session. All right, let's kick things off. So I would like to introduce my co-host today, David Morris, dialing in from Auckland, Aotearoa, New Zealand. David, oh look, I'm already seeing some waves coming up for you. Welcome in. First of all, how are you feeling this afternoon?
I'm feeling pretty energized and really curious. This sounds like a really good format for doing this. I love that idea of an interactive podcast. There's a recording that people can watch later, but there's the opportunity for people to ask questions live. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you for the invitation to take part.
Of course. I was trying to remember before the very first time that I met you, and all I can remember back is to Agile on the Beach. You're obviously a key pivotal part of the Agile on the Beach movement here in New Zealand. And sadly, we didn't have it this year due to all sorts of things happening. But I know you're a huge part of the Agile community. And specifically at the moment for you, looking around the Agile HR side, the adaptive org design. And so what we did briefly talk about this, not to put you on the spot too much, but in 60 seconds, do you want to give us a bit of an idea about the lens that you're coming at this conversation with?
Sure, thank you very much. I think I've been involved in coaching and consulting in lots of different organizations, from a stance within IT and digital, and occasionally from a strategy or transformation office. But in my last role at Vodafone, I reported directly to the Chief People Officer, and it was a fantastic opportunity to have as peers learning and development, HR business partners, and all those other critical roles in the people experience and organizational development space. And it really brought home to me that aspect of what we do in terms of Agile coaching, that is culture, that is people development, that is behavior and so forth, as well as all the important things around delivery and performance and process and so forth. And it goes to the heart of that first value pair in the Agile Manifesto, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. It's really interesting, actually. First thing this morning, I was just doing an internal talk to the Agile Guild Town Hall with McKinsey, and touched on where Agile coaches live. And it was interesting with this growing prevalence of seeing Agile coaching teams as part of the HR or people experience space as well. Still primarily for them in the transformation office space, because that's what they go in to set up. So that was interesting, kind of seeing that from one of the big consulting firms as well. Now that I'm independent and doing sort of coaching, consulting and training in my own right, you're right, the adaptive organization design is one of those areas where, having seen it and experienced it so many times, really want to be able to help other people get to the place where they can work on designing their own adaptive organizations as well, rather than necessarily needing to call on the big consulting firms.
Awesome. I imagine there's a few people in this call, I see a few nods going on in terms of desiring that knowledge and insight to create this stuff ourselves, rather than necessarily needing to call on someone else to tell us how to do it, right? Enable us with the ways to make these decisions, rather than necessarily telling us exactly how to do it. So beautiful. All right, we are set. We've got our two co-hosts, our communities in here. Between the two of us, we'll notice if anyone comes in. It is now 1:14 here. So we're going to hold about 35 minutes, which should give us about 7 questions we should be able to get through. So again, and I'll just keep copying the link back into the chat channel. I don't mean to feel spammy, but if people come in after I've put that in the chat channel, they can't see that link. That's how I always remember. Whenever someone new joins, we'll just pop that, keep putting that into the Slack channel. So again, if you're coming into this and you have a question you'd like to ask, feel free to ask it. This is your chance to get some different views and ideas on it. Otherwise, we've got a bunch of questions that we're going to jam through today as well. So let me get my little timer set for 5 minutes. Awesome. All right. Erin, your question has gone straight to the top. Erin, do you mind, if you're keen, to give us a bit of context? Kia ora, Erin.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. So I'll just sort of recap the question. Tips and techniques where people are hired against an actual job description, but they are now part of an agile team doing lots of different mahi and tasks. So doing lots of different work and tasks when they were hired against something quite different.
And they still may be accountable for a particular piece of what that team's performance is, but not necessarily doing that. Yeah. Is that enough context, I think?
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
Yep. Beautiful. Just to kind of flow onto that and to support you, what lens are you coming at it from? Are you perhaps in a role where you're hiring the people in? Are you maybe leading that group of people? Are you one of the people in the team?
Okay, so I am a business owner. We've got a business team, so we do injury prevention initiatives back into the health sector. So it's not a technology type space. So people report to me from a line management perspective, or to managers of managers within my team. They have clear accountabilities and job descriptions that they've been hired for, and we've just started putting them together in terms of an agile team and how they're working. So we haven't done the organisation design. So we've got now people fulfilling roles of product manager, product owners, and team members against other role descriptions. So we had people that were like delivery people, delivery coordinators, injury prevention partners that may have owned investment logic, or the relationships back out to the sector.
Yeah. And may I ask, is this all right to just keep getting a bit of context to help me kind of shape my thinking there? What challenge is that creating for you and that happening?
Yeah, I think obviously agiles come from a technology perspective. So you might have, 5 developers or 5 testers in the team, and you're creating your T-type team. But for us, we've sort of got specialists and people with deep knowledge. So we might have people hired from a clinician background, they're the qualified midwife or the qualified clinician, or someone else that's been the project manager, delivery coordinator, and now they're sort of putting those teams together. So it's more that specialist. So it's creating those, I suppose, what's expected of me. I've been hired as this, and now I'm in this team, and you're looking at me to pull other work.
Yeah. So expectations from the individual.
Yeah, and based on previous, I'm hired to do, and also that little bit of it, but I'm hired to do this, so therefore, why would I go and pick up that? So there's a little bit of that as well. I say we're only like 4 or 5 weeks in, so it's very, very new, but I have worked in this space before from more of a technology area or enterprise portfolio delivery, where your teams aren't as specialised and individual in terms of specialist individual roles.
Yeah. Beautiful. David, do you want to share any thoughts? I got a couple, but I want to send it through.
Yeah, thank you. I think firstly, I want to applaud the fact that rather than having cross-functional teams that are purely involved in the build and deploy of something, that you've actually got specialist roles taking part in these cross-functional teams. That's at the forefront of thinking, and that's definitely to be applauded. I think it is often a challenge where we come in with whether we're a developer, a tester, a business analyst, or a clinical specialist, or whatever, we bring in a specialism, and there's an interesting shift that happens in the way that we pull into a collective responsibility to achieve an outcome that we're sharing. And that does sometimes mean that we're taking part in conversations or contributing to things which are outside our comfort zone or outside of our specialism. It doesn't stop, for example, a developer or a QA analyst, it doesn't stop them having the responsibility or accountability that goes with their specialism, but there is more loaded on top because they're now jointly responsible to deliver on outcomes as a team. And I think that's the smarts there are in how we, rather than just saying we're burdening you with a whole bunch of stuff, it's actually we've got an opportunity to deliver more and kind of more effective or more to what we're aiming to do, because we're bringing you in early and continually all the way through. So yeah, that's. What do you think, Cheryl?
The thing that comes up when you're explaining it, Erin, was around expectations and people, arriving into something and it becoming something different than what they thought it was. And certainly from my experience working with, we were standing up some teams at a telco in Canada, and people were put into these teams not really by choice. They were kind of put into these teams and they said, this is the exciting new agile part of the organization. And they weren't really talked through what this meant in terms of what we were trying to achieve. And certainly we were starting to create cross-functional teams. So you had the whole lot of specialists, and in this case it was IT, so you had your designers and your developers and your testers. We hadn't really had the conversation around what we were aiming to achieve by having these cross-functional teams. And it was interesting, you know, there was a sort of domain cross of like, you're in my zone, this is my work, and you're in my team, but I normally do this, and I don't know who, you know, and one of the ways in which I was the Scrum Master at the time was to actually surface some of those conversations with the team, and provide an opportunity to talk about that, not necessarily as, I mean, as the Scrum Master, I was the leader, but the challenges were actually in amongst the team. We're sharing some of the jobs, we're teaching each other these different skills, and that team sort of coming together. So I guess it sounds as though you've got a number of people that have expectations of having these specialties. You've perhaps got a vision for what you're trying to create with having these different skill sets together. I wonder, you know, whether there's more opportunity there to help take them on the journey of what they're trying to achieve and why this may be of value to them. And I guess ultimately consents of whether or not do you want to go on that journey.
Yeah, I think the pulling of the team is fine, because that's, you know, that's quite clear about what we're doing. I think it's the letting go of possibly the accountabilities and the control, because these people may have been like a leader over that team, whereas now they've just become a team member. Or because we haven't gone through the org change piece, you might have a product manager, for example, that used to be the line manager over some of that team, and then it's like, I'm accountable for the delivery, and then all of a sudden now this team's deciding how we're going to deliver something. Which, when you're doing a simple, as I say, if you've got 5 developers or 5 testers and it's quite clear, but all of a sudden that team may not have the capability or don't have that clinical expertise to actually make a decision that this is how something's going to go. So I think the rub's more probably in that space versus
and dare I say it, often a big part of it can be our, I'm always careful about using this word in a sensitive context, but our egos. You know, especially when it comes, I used to be able to make those decisions, or I used to lead that team, and you know, I know there'll probably be some questions coming up through this around, you know, what happens when we start to shift the hierarchical models. What does that do for people that have potentially taken a long time to work their way up a ladder, and now you're trying to take the ladder out?
But they're still hired against that job description that gives them that ladder. That's the challenge we've got with going in and experimenting in this way of working, without saying, okay, let's strip everybody off, start from fresh. You're the product owner, you're the product manager, you're now the team. It's that transition piece to
and there's I'll have a quick look for it. I remember there's some great examples of job descriptions that are a lot less specific and allowing a lot more generalism, so that to avoid the challenge that you may be facing there, which is I'm hired against this job description, and now you're wanting me to be a generalist. Actually potentially looking at those job descriptions as to, are those job descriptions hampering what we're trying to create here?
Definitely.
Beautiful. I think we might have hit our 5-minute time.
I'll be quiet now.
Thanks for getting us started there, and it's awesome. And again, like I said, and I just want to share again, back onto the group, what we're sharing as answers from our perspective is to ignite conversations around complex topics. These are not the right or wrong answers. It's an opportunity to sort of talk this stuff out with people that have been doing this, exploring with this. So awesome. Kia ora. Thank you, Erin, for kicking us off with our first question. Again, if you've joined since I last reset this, we are running 5-minute sessions, if I'm a bit better with my timer, a chance to open up questions. We've got a Slido going down here. So there's probably something I need to do in the back end to push the answered questions down. I'll work that out in a moment. But if we go into the next question, Tristan, nice to hear. We'll go Tristan first, even though Tyler's just went up. Tyler, you'll be next. So Tristan, I'll read yours out if you want to, after I've read it, give us a little bit of context. So Tristan said, when reducing levels of hierarchy, here we go. Yep, cool. This is a nice lead in from our last combo. So removing senior, junior, how would you let people know that they're valued without just increasing the remuneration? Do you want to give us a little bit of, hey Tristan, nice to see you.
Yeah, sure. So essentially what we've found is it's a very agile thing for us to go, let's have more matrices, let's get rid of senior, junior, job titles. Everyone is a human, let's treat them like that. But when you take away that power level, and some people really kind of feel valued by their status and, like I say, going up that ladder. So when you start to take it away, what are some things you can add to kind of say, if everyone is a developer, if everyone is, just say, a Scrum Master, like what is the difference between someone who started and is a new graduate versus someone who's been there 10 years? How do you show that they're valued?
Yeah, beautiful question. David, do you want to kick us off? Anything you want to share in?
Sure. I think part of this can be what else is important to them in their role, and if it's what were they getting from being seen as a senior, or seen as being somebody with more experience. And if that is being seen as somebody to turn to for advice, for example, there are probably other ways to provide those opportunities with mentoring schemes, or with having communities of interest or communities of practice, which are not structural in terms of, somebody who establishes one of those doesn't then have a line, a role that's specific to that. It's a bit looser and more fluid, but it certainly allows people that have got those interests to still kind of tread that path and share that knowledge, or create a space where they learn more, even because different people are coming together for that.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that line is really important, is what's important to them. I did a program with Pia Maria Thorin, who's wrote the book Agile People, and the model that she used for profiling. So profiling was a really big part of it, leaning into what is most important to people, helping us understand the different things that drive us and motivate us. So REISS, so it's spelled REISS, REISS profiling. There are, I believe, 16 different areas that you basically answer a bunch of questions like a profiling tool. And one of them is around power. And it's a really interesting one. There's a number of questions in it to work with someone on, do some profiling and understand how important is that. For people that it's not important to, they find it really hard to comprehend. Why would it worry you if you've got, this different, and if, for example, you're in a role like an HR leader or a team manager, and you're going to your team, it doesn't matter. You can be a senior or junior. It doesn't, if that's not important to you, it's recognizing that for some people it is really important. And I love, like what David's saying there is having the conversation around what is important. The other part that's sort of coming up for me is around really understanding what it is that you are wanting to create as a human. What is your vision for your life? And I know that's a really big, bold question, but there is, in my experience, there's only a certain amount of remuneration or job changes that can really fulfill people. When we can get clear about what it is that's, someone really wants to achieve in their life, we can provide opportunities in an organization to support bringing those people's skills and abilities to life. It can take quite a different leadership style to encourage that. But when you start to create individual goals that can connect into a team's goals, to connect into the organization's goals, and the other way around as well. If you find you've got a pocket of people in your organization who are really good at XYZ, that may present an opportunity to your organization to offer that service or that product or that tool. So I think there's maybe a piece in there around really recognizing what is motivating people. Is it really the power that they desire? Or are there other ways that you can create a progression and a path and things to achieve that are a lot more aligned for them and what they want to be achieving in their life?
Yeah,
I might have gone quite deep with you there, Tristan, but
it's that word progression. I think you're right, because I think that's the thing that's missing. Like you go, all of a sudden I can't see the progression; it's hidden. And just like we can't measure our relationships with people, but it's so important for us to get deeper with our relationships. So it's a thing of, okay, well, in our work, and then if like you're saying with those conversations, then does it look differently for everyone? That they all need their individual way to go. This is how you're going to progress because it's best for you.
Yeah, that's a beautifully picked up progression. Senior to junior. What is that? That's a progression. You're right. But what if we progress towards things that actually really hit some sort of sense of like deep purpose to ourselves, you know, really make us feel fulfilled and achieving. And again, especially if you can link those into team goals and organizational goals, then you don't have to try and motivate people. Yeah.
I might just chime in because I think we've had a similar. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes. Yep.
Yep. Sorry. Okay. Cool. A similar experience where we've gotten rid of hierarchy and flattened out the structure, and people can't see where they go, because I used to be like, oh yeah, then I'll just, you know, quote unquote climb the ladder. And so I think I totally agree around other drivers besides REM. I think there is a role for shaping up what success looks like and what progression looks like even within role, and making sure that there's ways to actually objectively, to a certain extent, measure that and allow people to progress within role. So, you know, a junior developer will have a set of skills that someone that's been there for 10 years might not have, but just because you've been there for 10 years doesn't mean you're actually achieving at a higher level. And so, you know, different levels of mastery within particular role types can also shape up what people can strive for to achieve, but also make sure that we are rewarding and progressing people that are developing, so that it's not just, you know, like these, you know, annual salary progressions or whatever. So I think, yes, connecting to purpose and connecting to other things that drive people, but I do think that we've experienced anyway, without that framework that you know, rewards and remunerates progression within role, because we've gotten rid of the hierarchy, people don't see a future and they are not particularly engaged. So just a reflection from us. So
yeah, cool. And Tyler, your questions at the top, so we can maybe just jam straight in.
There were just there were two comments shared in the chat, which I'm sure everyone can see.
Good work, David.
It's yeah, from Shona. Our organisation still has hierarchy, however, everyone's paid at 100% regardless of experience. That's interesting. We're having forward conversations with each individual and trying to keep motivated through their purpose. So that's interesting. How if you're happy to share something about that, how have you found that process?
Yeah, it's been quite interesting. So I've been with the organisation for about 1.5 years now, and I thought when I first came in that there was still kind of progression, but they actually, the way that it works is, so everybody comes in, you're at 100% of the band, but then we stay ahead of the market, like looking at what's happening in the market. So they can readjust that salary if that market is increasing, and some bands, I think they have put a market premium on top if it's a temporary thing. So that's kind of how the organisation's dealing with it. They've also introduced the, I said, forward conversation. So it's just looking at, I think like it's already been mentioned by Tyler and stuff as well, is that we look at what are you wanting to achieve for yourself, for the team, etc., and just building on that development for that person. So it's whatever feels right for them. We, you know, try and work towards that so that they're not focused on the financial rewards. It becomes about what it's that intrinsic motivation.
Beautiful. Shone, do you mind if you're comfortable to share your organisation?
With Kainga Ora in New Zealand.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. And Tristan, again, if you guys feel comfortable, you don't have to, but I think it's always interesting when we hear a story to link to know which organisation that's happening with. So Tristan, where are you at the moment?
I'm based with Southern Cross.
Southern Cross, that's right. Cool. Beautiful. All right.
So should we go to Tyler's question now?
Tyler, and yeah, Tyler, what's the name of your organisation? Where are you at?
Yeah, I'm at Sky Television.
Cool. Awesome.
Which is a wholly New Zealand company, just in case anyone thinks it's linked to Sky UK or Sky Australia.
Cool. So Tyler, your question, what are some of the principles around approach to change as an organisation goes from a more traditional divisional structure to a cross-functional agile one. I'm going to check in with David on this because I know this is where his jam is at the moment.
Yeah.
I'll set the timer.
Thank you. I think the my master's study, I did an MBA, and my study there was around what makes these sorts of transformations succeed or fail, and the biggest factor seemed to be that taking a very plan-driven, top-down approach to these sorts of changes doesn't predicate success. And it's ironic when we think we're trying to shift an organization to more adaptive ways of working, more people-centric ways of working. And so therefore, I've found increasingly that adopting a lot of those practices in how we think about the change and how we run with the change are really effective at introducing the change. So breaking the big change down into smaller chunks, and co-creating with workshops and so on with people that are affected by the change, what are some of the options, and then spinning up experiments and trying different things out, seeing what works and what doesn't work. And that really kind of elevates the sense of buy-in and ownership of how things are moving forwards. Even if people choose options that don't end up working, the fact that they've had the opportunity to be involved is really good. So anything, it can be, sometimes it's called lean change management, or agile change or whatever, but it doesn't really matter what name it goes by. But that way of approaching change as a more, in smaller increments is really healthy. What have you seen?
Yeah. Experimentation, I know it's a really obvious obvious response, but that in my experience has been the only way that we can learn whether or not it's going to work. And the classic example, talking about a garden and deciding that you're going to replant part of the garden, depending on the environment in the garden, the soil, the weather, how you do it, the approach you do it, what plants you take apart, which ones you put together, it really is something you have to be very careful and delicate. It's very delicate, and what's certainly helped me when making these sorts of changes is setting hypothesis statements, so that we can be really clear about what it is, the change that we're looking to make, what we believe is going to happen, and how we're going to measure it. And that can be, sometimes we believe we've come up with a great approach and we might be absolutely right, but until we actually identify what the problem is we think we're going to solve, have something in place to test it out, and recognize that if we do it all at once, it's going to be quite challenging to know which bits worked and which didn't, what impacted what. Many organizations, whenever they're shifting their ways of working, whether we're calling it agile, whether we're calling it business agility, whether it's something completely different, often start in small pockets, and work with often parts of the organization that are up for the change. When you can identify either a group or you can create something to experiment, and even, when it comes to changing job descriptions, is there a part of your organization that you can experiment with who are willing to go on the journey, and we can test some things out, we can talk to people just like we do with, when we're testing products, get some feedback, learn what parts upset people, what part is important to people, how do we then take those learnings and then do this again with another group and take the same theory, does it work again? What do we learn when we do this? So I guess one of the pieces there is around one structural change overnight could mean a very successful garden, or you could do a lot of damage to all of the plants and you've got a lot of work to rebuild that. So I guess it's sort of always, I guess my thinking around it and my experience is, can you find a part of your organization that you can test it with, people that are willing to go on that journey, and then set really clear experiments and ways to measure and test it to see whether or not these things are going to work. And the moment you can also create that, you can create a story for everyone else in the organization to help them understand what it is you're trying to achieve. Just all of a sudden removing people's titles can be quite frightening for people if they don't understand what's happening. And sometimes people need to see other people in the organisation go through it and feel comfortable with it before they're willing to go on that journey as well. So I guess just throwing back in the experimentation side of things, certainly when it comes to changing the garden, pulling bits up, removing bits out, taking a giant tree out, / a leader of a team, pulling a giant tree out, recognising the impacts that can have as well.
Before we move on to another question, I know that there's quite a few people on the call that have got related experience. I just wanted to see if anybody else had anything that different they wanted to add in there. Okay.
I think my only reflection on that is that I do agree, I think, in terms of those creating a story. I do feel we have the experience where the old and the new rubs up against each other. And I think there's a point at which the two things struggle to coexist because the cross-functional collaborative teams start to get frustrated with the bureaucratic patch protection of the kind of siloed structure. And so I think the question that I'm still playing with is there a point at which you then just need to kind of accelerate and execute the change because the two things struggle to coexist. But again, that's just a hypothesis or just a question.
I mean, the beautiful part of that is I don't believe there's one answer. There's not a right or wrong. It would be an incredibly interesting experiment. In my experience, there's something really magical, even if it's uncomfortable, that starts to happen when you talk about that shift that you mentioned, that the momentum of this, often a pilot or some sort of small thing that we've started over here starts to create enough momentum and proof of some really effective changes that it starts to then impact on the larger system. And you can then try and change all of the larger system to meet that, or can you support what's in here to organically start to shift and change and use this as the learnings to help? So yeah, I guess how hands-on do you want to be in those decisions? How is it for you to decide? Is it for is the decision to do that one you want to make without consultation? Is it one that you want to get feedback on? I guess all of these are little pieces that obviously your decisions to make, but just knowing that if there's naturally something positive and effective happening there, that disruption to the norm can be a really positive thing if cultivated well. Yeah.
So we've probably got, that's an example for us of, so I'm working in a project environment, so I look after a team of business analysts, and we've got a organisational improvement structure with projects and change and BAs, etc. So we've got a project that is working agile, and that took quite a while for them to kind of get that across the line, particularly with our development team, which are working traditionally waterfall, so they don't, follow agile. So we've managed to get them into a sprint, but it's been difficult for them to manage that. We are starting to see the tentacles grow. We've got other people in areas, and as they're coming through, that want to work a bit more agile, but we are butting up against some of the traditional setup of how we're working. So I am starting to see some shift in mindset. We are starting to also see that as an organisational improvement group, we are having these conversations. We have just created a role for a manager of agile change. So I think we're at the beginning of that journey. And I know even people coming through now, we're starting to get a lot more people wanting to work agile. So once they get in, if they accept the challenge of trying to, get in there and make change. We are, you know, allowing them to kind of shift and adapt how they work, with the view to looking at long term, we might move down to that path. But it is challenging, like you say, to connect all the dots.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Shane. How do I pronounce your name?
Oh, Shanae.
Shanae. Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing those examples as well. I know that you know, having those real examples is super helpful for sort of applying this stuff as well. All right, we're going to jump onto, because the questions are still sort of coming in, and I want to respect the questions that have been asked. Shavindra, if I said that correctly, I've just come across Holacracy seems to reduce major augury structures, and from my understanding, it helps teams define the roles. Holacracy, David, do you want to share your thoughts on Holacracy as an optional model?
Yeah, well, without putting Chivindra on the spot, what is it that you've seen in Holacracy that has kind of sparked that interest?
Well, just got a very introductory talk recently, and that's all the experience. I just thought it was related to what we were talking about.
Great. Okay, thank you. I think it's it is quite a fundamental rethink about how an organisation organises itself from that from the point of view of thinking about autonomy, for example. The strength about Holacracy. So for those that are not familiar with it, Holacracy is made up of lots of kind of circles, or if you like, squads or teams of people that come together for a specific purpose, and there's somebody in each circle that kind of relates out to people in other circles. I'm vastly oversimplifying, but it's quite an organic way of organising. But it's very, very hands off. It's kind of almost the opposite of command and control. So it is often quite a big change for organisations. I think if you can work your way through it, I think it can be quite exhilarating. With Agile on the Beach organisation that Cheryl mentioned earlier, we deliberately chose as a founding principle for how we were going to organise the different portfolios for planning and setting up the organisation and the events as a conference series, that we would adopt Holacracy as our organising principle. And I think it enabled us to kind of spring up circles and then get rid of them on a quite a dynamic footing, I think, which was really helpful. It doesn't necessarily suit all organisations, though. I would say that. I think what's interesting is it wouldn't necessarily lead. So I'll close on this because I've spoken for a bit there. I don't think it would necessarily reduce the amount of change in an organisation. But if we think about a restructure being a big episodic change and maybe once every 3 years, okay, in some organisations once every 6 months or whatever, there's a significant change of, you know, structural change of whole groups of people moving from one area to the other in terms of reporting lines and that sort of thing. That starts to happen less because you are sort of, you know, decomposing areas of responsibility down. There still will be lots of shift ongoing because things tend to need to be much more dynamic, but it's much less of a change being imposed on everybody. And when a new circle or a new team forms, it's critical that they do understand their purpose. So they kind of, whether you want to use the language of charter or whatever, they do have to kind of agree what they're there to do and what their working norms are going to be and how they fit into the rest of that holacratic system. That's my take on it. I know Shane Hastie's on the call. I don't know if I'm putting him on the spot, but I know he's got a fair bit more experience in that space.
And maybe if I can kind of support what you're sharing there as well, David, around there are some really key considerations when thinking about which model do I choose? Is it going to be Holacracy? Is it going to, am I trying to remove hierarchical structures because there's a power imbalance? Am I trying to increase the flow of value through my work, through my organization? And that's often, you know, one of the primary goals that forces an organization to rethink the way that they're structured is, you know, don't change your structure if it's working, is probably my first thought, because if it's working, then that's great. It's usually when things are not working that we start to look at these. And my guess is anyone on the call is either in an organization that's being hindered by the current structure that it has, or at least it can foresee that it may in the future. So when you're looking at, you know, one of those key drivers can be around where is work getting blocked? Where is flow getting blocked in the organization? And normally when we talk about the silos, those are often the creators of it, so looking at these new structures. But with Holacracy or anything where we're trying to decentralize the decision making, and that's, you know, probably one of the biggest challenges with Holacracy, but one of the most beautiful things that can come out of it is we shift the decision making to the people that are doing the work. And, you know, when we're talking earlier around seniority and roles, looking at what are those roles there to serve? How do they increase the flow of work and value through our teams to our customer? And if we're looking at it from an agile HR perspective, with the goal of we want to deliver more value to our customer faster, then we start to look at how do we structure our teams in a way that provides that. And often when we have hierarchies, it's the decision-making time that holds us up in delivering that value. So I guess that's probably one of the biggest considerations that I'm conscious of when we're looking at removing any kind of hierarchy or looking at the likes of Holacracy, is I think the acronym FDV, it always sits in my head, flow, so the flow of work, you know, the time it takes, you know, when you're thinking about which structure will I pick, the flow of work, how long is it taking you to get an idea to market? How clear are you on the speed of which that's moving? Have you even measured it? Is there even a problem? The D is around decisions. So, you know, ensuring that the people that are closest to the work have the context they need in order to make the decisions that they need to. And often one of the ways to achieve that is to remove hierarchy. That might be one of the options. And then the V is around value. So ensuring that you understand what value means to your customer or whoever it is your organization is serving, looking at flow, decisions, and value, you know, just starting to shift and look at what is it we're trying to achieve by changing our structure, because that might help you decide which one is the one you want to experiment with, or the flow, or the path that you want to go down. So just to add a few kind of additions onto that as well, there's obviously a bunch of information around the likes of Holacracy as a model. All I would kind of check in on is, what is the problem you're trying to solve with this new model? And are you considering those things around flow of work, the decisions to be made, and are you clear on what value is for your customer? Anything, David, you want to share in on that before we've got 6 minutes left? Might not have time for another question, but maybe if you want to sort of summarize or close out anything that you want to share before we head into the weekend.
Yeah, thank you. I think the principles of the holacratic design we were just talking about actually sits quite nicely in that adaptive organization design space. If we're thinking about shifting people between teams and so on, the next question actually was, have you seen examples of other types of organization structure? And I think a lot of you will have seen, whether you call them tribes or value streams, ways of bringing teams of teams together to focus on combined outcomes, whether it's a particular market segment or set of customers or a particular type of product, depending on how your organization is focused. And I think that idea of being open to moving people or moving teams in a mindful and not on a whim, and not continually moving people to the work all the time, but in terms of a understanding that there's a shift and there's a new need coming up, and planning for and making some of those changes. It's not wholesale change, it's kind of more incremental change, But that's another great example of kind of being very adaptive, value-driven, customer-driven, and feedback-driven in terms of how we think about our organisation design. I think the conversations that we've had and the thoughts that have been shared in the session today have been really enlightening. I think I've really enjoyed hearing from some of you where you've tried things in organisations, and I think I was hoping that my hypothesis for accepting Cheryl's invitation for coming on this was that not only would it be a conversation and set of questions, but actually there'd be a more open learning as well. So I've really valued that. Thank you.
Kia ora, and we've really valued your time. I know this is a space that you are super focused on at the moment. I know you also, when we talked about it, because I shared in the LinkedIn group, which by the way, I'll put in the chat channel, if you do want to stay connected into what we're doing, I created the LinkedIn group because I thought that might be helpful. It's where I share events or like any notes from this. I'll put a few things in there as to things we've referenced today. I also shared in there the learning outcomes for the IC Agile, what's it called? Adaptive Org Design program. Is that right, David? And your, there it is, Adaptive Org Design Learning Outcomes. So I shared the learning outcomes PDF in the group. If you want to go and check that, I think they're super interesting. They're beta version at the moment. So, you know, all of the IC Agile learning outcomes are collaboratively co-created from people all around the world. And it just sort of shows you in there some really interesting, you know, the way that they've categorized the topics around this topic and the types of things that you would need to learn if you were going to kind of go down this path of understanding it. So I imagine that that will be of value for anyone that's kind of wanting to get their teeth into this a bit more. But David, you're also one of the only people I think in New Zealand that are teaching in this now, specifically lining up with IC Agile as well.
Well, thank you very much for that opportunity to share that. Yeah, both in terms of people development and adaptive organisation design, I think I'm the only person in New Zealand currently approved by IC Agile to deliver training, certainly in adaptive org design. But yeah, I'd be very happy to just have an open chat with anybody about, you know, what those learning outcomes are and how they can be of use to anybody.
Beautiful. And maybe best way to contact you, LinkedIn?
Yeah, on LinkedIn, on my website, which is davidjcmorris.com.
We might chuck that on, we'll chuck that on our group channel when we come out of here on the LinkedIn group.
Beautiful. All right.
Because you know, you giving your time today is important, and this is the work that you do. So if people are interested, if you've got value from what David shared, feel free to connect up, and like you said, even if it's just to have a conversation and jam on this awesome topic. Kia ora. That is our session for today. Man, that hour just flies by. I always put my heater on in the office when I come in because it feels cold, and by the end, I'm like but I really appreciate, I know we didn't get to all of the questions today, but feel free if you do want to connect with David or I afterwards. You know, we get excited about this stuff and talk about this stuff all the time. I've created another event for a month's time. I will put the link into the LinkedIn group. I think it's the 20th of next month. Same again, it's a Friday, 1 to 2 in the afternoon, same format, but we'll pick a different topic, which reminds me, that was close, polling. Okay, I'm going to launch a poll, so maybe don't do this if you're driving, but if you have an opportunity right now, I've opened up, it's just a chance to get feedback without having to send you a form that you have to go off and remember to do later. If you can just put in now, there's 4 things we're interested in. Does the timing of our session work for you? So it's 1 to 2 New Zealand time. If for Renee, it's 8 o'clock at night. Duration, we keep it at an hour, sort of keeps it hopefully long enough we can get into a few topics, but not too long that people kind of go to sleep. Format, this sort of idea of this live podcast, you can listen in, you can chime in, or just be a bystander if you like. And then content. This is the final question. Which of the topics do you want us to jump into next month? Because in typical response to the user format, we want to make sure that we are continuing to talk about topics that are of interest to the community. So I'll give everyone a chance just to put their votes in. At the moment, it looks as though in the content side of it, roles and expectations is like fighting at the front with enabling effective performance. If anyone wants to get their final votes in, but I believe right now roles and expectations is still just leading. Oh, enabling effective performance. It's like watching a race. All right, enabling effective performance is coming up. Oh, that's a cool one. All right, I'm going to give it 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Boom. All right, enabling effective performance. I think I can go share results. Here we go. Cool, because we're about transparency here. Looks as though timing's pretty good. Good duration. People might like a little bit longer. Okay, cool. That's good to know. Generally, format was either perfect or okay, and enabling effective performance is our winner. So that will be our topic next month. Thank you for joining us and being part of it. One thing that I'd love to end this on in terms of like drop the mic lines, I was thinking about this earlier, was it is my belief that adaptive individuals are the key to an adaptive organisation. And I just want to kind of leave that thought, especially from an agile HR lens. You can pick the best structures in the world, but if the individuals within that structure, within that system, don't have their own adaptability or their ability to create adaptation, there'll always be a challenge, my belief. So personal agility is where I'm at. This is why I'm so focused on that space at the moment. And if that's a topic that interests you, feel free to get in touch, because I love it, and that is my belief. This is the core of it, is the people that we're working with. This is why we're here. This is why we have this community. So thank you for being part of it. I've only gone 2 minutes over today, but it is so nice to connect in with everyone. I'll share the recording to this as well if there's anything that you want to come back and listen to later. And feel free to join our LinkedIn community and just stay connected with what we're doing. Before you leave, if you wish, feel free to turn on your mic and say farewell. Kia ora.
Thank you so much. Kia ora.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Jan. Thanks,
See you
Tristan,
later.
Tyler, Karen, Renee,
Bye. Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye.
Martin.
Thanks.
Shane.
Bye.
See you, Renee. Oh, Shane's just a chair.
He was there until just now.
Awesome. Stop recording. Boom.